Welcome to the motherfucking relay where we're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Well, like many of the fans, WBO welterweight champion Terrence Crawford also reacted to yesterday's fight between Keith Thurman and Josecito Lopez. And he had this to say. He said, Keith Thurman is showing why he's a champion. He's doing everything he's got to do to get the win. You gotta respect that he's in a real fight right now. And I'll tell you that Terrence Crawford is cutting Keith Thurman more slack than a lot of the fans are.
Why is that?
And it's surprising because, one, these guys are rivals. Keith Thurman, Terrence Crawford, these guys are rivals. They're champions in the same weight class, but they're with different outfits. Thus, in some form or another, they are in each other's crosshairs. And in spite of all Keith Thurman's negative comments towards Terrence Crawford, in spite of his oversights on Terrence Crawford as a champion in the welterweight division, in spite of all of those rude things that Keith Thurman said, Terrence Crawford is giving Keith Thurman credit. More credit than many of the fans are. But why is that? Why is it that so many of the fans are being so hard on Keith Thurman?
We knew he needed a tune-up.
It's not as simple as saying Keith Thurman looked like shit, because we were all aware that this is a guy that hasn't fought in roughly 2 years, 22 months, just 2 months short of a 2-year hiatus. But we were all aware of that.
Yeah.
We all knew that Keith Thurman, it's unlikely that he would walk into a unification fight, his first fight back.
Highly unlikely.
It's a tune-up fight. It's a necessary evil. But if everybody knows this, then why are they being so hard on Keith Thurman? I'll tell you why. Because before that fight even took place, before any of that even took place, Keith Thurman let it be known that, he's going to have a little tune-up fight. It's the get-back year. It's not the first time we heard that shit. But he let everybody know that he's going to have a little tune-up fight.
And that's cool.
The thing is that he said that he has no plans of fighting either Terrence Crawford or Errol Spence anytime this year. That's a part of the reason he's being criticized. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, well, maybe he doesn't feel ready for those opponents. Maybe he doesn't feel ready for those fights. Okay. For argument's sake, I'll give you that and I'll say this. Well, how is it you don't feel ready for those fights, but you do feel ready to contend for the WBC title? How's that work? Also, you're not okay to fight Errol Spence. You're not okay to fight Terrence Crawford, even though the fight is unlikely, but whatever. You're not okay to fight him either. But you are okay to fight a guy that you beat already, Shawn Porter, for a title that you already used to hold. Shawn Porter is a champion the way that they are champions. Shawn Porter is an elite-level welterweight the same way they are elite-level welterweights.
That's true.
But the difference between Shawn Porter and those guys is you already beat Shawn Porter. So it does give off the impression that if you are to unify a title this year, it's going to be the path of least resistance. It would be against a guy that you beat already. Now, Shawn Porter ain't no walk in the park, even though Keith beat him. Anybody that saw that fight knows. That fight wasn't no walk in the park for Keith Thurman.
It wasn't.
But at the end of the day, when faced with fighting other undefeated champions like yourself, you don't want to do that. You would rather fight a guy that you beat already. And that way, you're being very selective. You're being very selective as far as what you want to do, even though you're the guy that runs around telling people you got to owe, and you ain't afraid to let it go.
You sure?
Well, you sound kind of afraid to me. Keith Thurman was a guy who years ago had many snap judgments, many snap criticisms about Errol Spence, that he would burst his bubble, all that jazz. He used to say all kinds of fun stuff. And little by little, the smoke started to clear, and it became more and more apparent that Keith Thurman don't want no parts of Errol Spence, and all he's going to do is cook up different reasons for that fight not to happen. So what's the excuse this year? That, you're not ready for that fight. Oh, but you're ready for Shawn Porter?
Why not Errol?
Why? Because you beat him already, right? You're not ready for Errol Spence, but you're ready for Manny Pacquiao.
Now, you've said that this is your get-back year. But with that said, what would you like next? If this Manny Pacquiao fight were to come to fruition in 2019, would you take it?
I most likely would definitely take it. I'm going to have to talk to my team. We're going to have to talk to our managers. But I feel good. That was a beautiful fight. I'd love to have that. Bring it in the ring. Maybe Brooklyn, maybe Vegas, wherever Manny Pacquiao wants it. I'd fight him in the Philippines if I had to, baby.
Now, you'll notice that from person to person, Keith Thurman does not keep the same energy.
No.
And that is yet another reason that he receives so much criticism. Because on one end, he'll say things like he's got to owe, and he's not afraid to let it go. But on the other end, he doesn't keep the same energy from person to person, from opponent to opponent. You'll notice that as soon as Danny Garcia entered the welterweight division years ago, Keith Thurman was riding that guy's ass.
Remember?
Danny Garcia, Keith Thurman, let him know.
I want Danny Garcia. I want more than one belt.
No disrespect to Team Garcia, but
he is very vague when he talks about what's next for himself in his career. No disrespect, Al Heyman manages all of us, and he does it in a tremendous fashion, and he does have options. So he's just the kind of fighter that says, hey, I got options.
He was very hungry to fight a guy who had just moved up into the weight class. And it's mostly because people's perception of Danny Garcia was that he would be a fish out of water there. That it's going to be slim pickings for Danny Garcia because this ain't 140. It's a lot of killers up here. That was the perception. And Keith adequately conveyed that perception by targeting him most of all. But he didn't show that same energy. He didn't show that same urgency in regards to Kell Brook, a guy who was already welterweight champion, a guy who was welterweight champion for something like, 3 years? You didn't see Keith Thurman hounding Kell Brook for a unification fight anywhere near as much as he was hounding Danny Garcia. That gave people the impression that the only reason you keep fucking with that kid is because he just got here. Keith Thurman don't keep the same energy when it comes from person to person. You know, on a person-to-person basis, Keith Thurman don't keep the same energy, and that's what we're seeing here. That, you want to fight Shawn. So you're good to fight Shawn, and you'd go anywhere to fight Manny. You just don't keep that same energy when it comes to Errol Spence. You don't keep that same energy when it comes to Terrence Crawford. Even though you had any myriad of shit to say about Terrence Crawford, that you don't respect him as a champion. Well, I'll tell you. While Terrence Crawford himself might have the good nature to extend an olive branch and extend a professional courtesy to a fellow champion in Keith Thurman by giving him credit for doing what he needed to do to survive, while Terrence Crawford might want to do that, the fans, they've had it up to here with Keith Thurman, because a lot of what he says comes off as very disingenuous. You say you got an O, and you ain't afraid to let it go, but your movements, they tell another story. They say something else. That's just some shit you're saying. You criticized Floyd Mayweather. You accuse him of being selective.
But ain't you being selective?
Wasn't Keith Thurman the guy that always used to criticize Floyd Mayweather for how selective he was? I'm not like that. Or some shit. Wasn't that Keith Thurman?
How come you don't want that fight with Spence? That's the
Not
fight.
that I don't want it. Like I said on stage, I'm not Floyd Mayweather, okay?
Let him fight Diego Chavez. Let him fight any one fighter. Let him fight 1 to 2 fighters that I fought. And then let's really have this real conversation about Errol, the true Spence, whatever his name is. You know what I mean? If you're the truth, I speak truth. I got no problem fighting you.
How come you don't want that fight with Spence? That's the
Not
fight.
that I don't want it.
You're not. I know you said it's all about your health.
Yeah, the moment's not now.
What?
It's not today, and it's not tomorrow.
But Keith Thurman appears to be the selective one.
But Errol Spence and expanding outside of this unification into another unification just is not going to happen this year.
If this Manny Pacquiao fight were to come to fruition in 2019, would you take it?
I most likely would definitely take it. I'm going to have to talk to my team. We're going to have to talk to our managers. But I feel good. That was a beautiful fight. I'd love to have that. Bring it in the ring. Maybe Brooklyn, maybe Vegas, wherever Manny Pacquiao wants it. I'd fight him in the Philippines if I had to, baby.
You still don't want to fight Spence, though. You don't want to fight him, but you got time for Shawn, and you got time for Manny. Why you being so selective? Why not Errol at the end of the year? Why don't you tell yourself right now, I'm going to have another tune-up fight to get me ready for Errol, and I want to finish off 2019 by giving the fans the fight that they've been asking for years. I'm going to take on the boogeyman, the guy that you guys claim I'm afraid of. Why not do that? What, is Errol's title somehow lesser than Shawn's? Oh, I get it. You think I'm being mean, right? You know, in my post-fight reaction video discussing the Thurman versus Lopez fight and how Thurman went life or death in a fight that was supposed to be easy. That was supposed to be a tune-up fight, ladies and gentlemen, not a war. That's the reality of it. That was supposed to be a gimme fight for Keith. An opportunity to shake off the cobwebs, shake off the ring rust, but not go to war. That's not what it was supposed to be, but that's what it was. And there were some people in my last video that didn't like me saying that. To those people, I got a question. Why you think Keith Thurman is more comfortable fighting a guy that he beat already or a guy in his early 40s in the twilight of his career? Why would he be more comfortable with those fights instead of a Spence fight at the end of the year? Now, he has ruled out all possibility of that fight before the Lopez fight even took place. He let it be known he's not trying to have that fight this year. But after the Lopez fight, you want to talk about some Manny Pacquiao? Why are you more comfortable fighting a guy in the twilight of his career in his early 40s instead of a young, undefeated champion in his prime like yourself? Does the risk versus rewards factor have anything to do with that? Is it because you know that the Errol Spence fight is a riskier fight than either a rematch with Shawn or a fight with Manny? Could that be the reason? I mean, think about it. Which out of those three fights is the riskiest fight for Keith Thurman? Out of those three, Errol Spence, Manny Pacquiao, Shawn Porter. Rank those fights in order from most risk to least risk. Which really is the riskier fight?
Finish him.
I'll tell you this much. You'd get more attention fighting Errol Spence than you would Shawn Porter. Maybe not as much for Manny Pacquiao, but you definitely get more attention fighting Errol Spence than you would fighting Shawn Porter again. And yet, the more attractive fight to Keith Thurman is the Shawn Porter fight. Now, the Manny Pacquiao fight, yeah, you might get more attention for that fight, but that fight actually isn't for a world title because you already hold the full version of the WBA title. Manny's got the baby belt to your belt. So that's not really a unification fight. And on top of that, Manny's circling the drain, one way or another. Manny Pacquiao is in his early 40s, okay? So there's gotta be a reason that the guy who's in his early 40s seems like a more attractive fight to you than Errol Spence, which is a big fight in and of itself. You just don't ever seem to get around to it. Ladies and gentlemen, it's really not my intention to be a harsh critic. I'm just being honest about what I'm looking at, and there are a lot of people out there who feel similarly. That Keith Thurman is not consistent, that his energy, his demeanor from person to person, fight by fight, opponent to opponent. He doesn't keep the same energy, but he's the guy who wants you to believe that he's got a O, and he's not afraid to let it go. Well, it seems to me that you're just trying to take the boxing fans for a ride. You want them to believe that shit, but in reality, you're just as selective as the people that you try to criticize. And that makes you quite a big hypocrite. All I'm doing is pointing it out. Now, I'll tell you some things that might have exonerated Keith Thurman of the criticism that he's currently receiving. Perhaps if he weren't so disingenuous with his commentary regarding other fighters, that might have saved him some of the criticism that he's receiving now. Now, in regards to the criticism, Keith Thurman's the guy that said that he doesn't owe anybody anything. He doesn't owe the fans. So I'm not even completely sure that he gives a rat's ass what people are saying in the YouTube boxing community or the Instagram boxing community or anywhere else. You know, and he said that before the fight when they asked him a couple of questions. So let's put it this way. This is just my take. You can feel free to disagree. But like I said, if Keith Thurman showed the same energy every time, that would encompass and entail dignity and integrity, that you're not just putting on for the cameras or whatever. You're being 100% of the time. You know, people tend to like that. But even the ones that don't, they really can't hold it against you because at least you're being honest. The second thing that might have exonerated Keith Thurman of criticism is, look, this is a guy who was away for about 22 months. That's only 2 months short of 2 years. Round up, you're talking about 2 years. And the WBA allowed this guy to plop that WBA title on his ass and sit on it. You know, if that were anybody else, they would have been labeled a champion in recess due to how long they've spent away from the ring, due to the duration of time they've spent away from boxing. If that was anybody else, they would have been labeled a champion in recess, but Keith Thurman is sitting here as a champion today.
2 years later.
He runs around calling himself the number one guy in the welterweight division. No, maybe you were at some point. Maybe that's what you were. But what you are is a guy who just went life or death in what was supposed to be a gimme fight, a tune-up fight. That is what you are today. In his time away, he's criticized what more active fighters than himself have been doing, criticizing their legacies, their quality of competition. But look at you and how you just looked against a guy that was supposed to be an easy out, an easy opponent, an opponent that's really just in there for you to get some rounds in. Because I reiterate, this was a tune-up fight. This was not supposed to be a war, but that's what it turned out to be. So after all the negative comments from Keith Thurman, all the snap judgments, all the criticisms that he has for everybody else, we're supposed to turn a blind eye to him when he goes out there and looks like shit? Not on this channel. And I don't give a flying fuck whose potato head fans get upset whenever I point out the inconsistencies in what someone is doing, what someone is saying, or when something is going on, because that's the whole point of the channel. Relaying all the available information that is out there so that we can get an accurate picture of what's going on. But it just so happens that when we do this, there's always a subsect of people that just can't handle the truth. That Keith Thurman don't keep the same energy from person to person, and that's why he's constantly being criticized. That him even being able to hold a world title today is a privilege, not a right. It's a privilege, because Dennis Lebedev spent less time away from the ring than Keith Thurman, and the WBA didn't hesitate to call him a champion in recess, so why'd Keith Thurman get a pass? Friends in the right places. Wink, wink. Now, once again, I'm not complaining that Denis Lebedev was labeled a champion in recess because that decision from the WBA led us to getting an undisputed cruiserweight champion in that division. But that's the point. That's one instance where the WBA did what they should have done, whereas with Keith Thurman, they should have told this guy to vacate his title a long time ago, but they didn't. And what's he done with the title? Little more than hold it hostage. He just defended it for the first time in 2 years. Roughly 2 years. That's a title that could have been and should have been in circulation, so that somehow, some way, we could come that much closer to getting an undisputed champion in this weight class, because as it stands, everything seems to be stagnating. Everything and everyone is at a stalemate. Unification fights are not happening. But maybe if that title would have been in rotation, we would have been that much closer to that kind of a champion, that kind of a situation. You know, I'll tell you, it's always going to be a group of guys, a group of girls that get upset whenever they visit this channel because we don't pull punches on anybody. We gather all the available information to get the most accurate picture and give the most accurate depiction of what is really going on. And when that harsh light is put on Keith Thurman, what you find is that he doesn't keep the same energy as you know, when he's talking about so-and-so and so-and-so. He's just not, you know, a very genuine guy. He doesn't come off as being genuine when his demeanor changes from person to person. And you know what? You don't have to like that I'm pointing that out, but I'm not going to stop pointing that out because, well, that's the fucking point. If the truth of these kinds of things bothers you, I have a bit of advice. Stick your finger in your ear and your thumb in your ass and see if I give a fuck. Now, in regards to Keith Thurman calling out Manny Pacquiao, that fight potentially coming into fruition, I'll tell you, and I'll be completely honest, it's not a bad fight, but neither is the Spence fight. The difference between those fights, however, are the risks involved. That in Spence, you're not facing a guy that's in his early 40s in the twilight of his career. Both fights would garner attention. Both fights are good fights. I'm sure that they could get a lot of attention matching Keith Thurman against Manny Pacquiao. And it's doable because, well, Manny holds the lesser version of Keith's title. So if the WBA decided to consolidate those titles and order those two guys to fight each other, that could create that situation. And it just so happens that they are both on the same side of the street. So it is a possibility. At minimum, it's a possibility, and it is a fight that could get a lot of attention. But I will tell you that if you know, and I said it already, if Manny seems like more of a priority to Keith, don't be naive about it. Don't lie to yourself. It's because there's less risks involved fighting Manny, who's aging, very much aging, especially at this point, than taking on a young guy who's in his prime. So that's what would make that fight more attractive to Keith. The question is that an attractive fight to Manny? I think ultimately the final decision in regards to a fight like that coming off has nothing to do with Keith Thurman and not even as much to do with the WBA so much as, is that something that Manny Pacquiao wants? Because we know who the bigger name in that situation is. Is that a fight that Manny Pacquiao in his heart of hearts is really receptive to at this point in his career? There's no way to know that right now, but we'll just have to wait and see.